Welcome everyone if you're just tuning in. I'm going to go over a few very simple Zoom tools for you to use. All of our panelists will be reading tonight, and if you want to communicate with them, you can use two tools that are part of this webinar. They're located at the bottom of your screen if you're joining on a laptop. They might be located at the top of the screen if you're joining on a tablet or a phone. We'll be using the Q&A and the chat. So if you want to test out the chat right now, you can let us know where you are. Where are you joining us from? You can type in your city or your state, and I'll read them out as they come in. And then towards the end of the event, we can use the Q&A. You can ask any questions for our panelists that you have throughout the event, and at the end, we'll review them. So again, comments can go in the chat, questions can go in the Q&A. And I'm gonna let us know who is on the call. So we've got Vermont, Ottawa, Canada, Hudson, New York, Northern New Jersey, Washington, DC, Hillsborough, North Carolina, Maryland, Cleveland, Eugene, Oregon, hello from LA, but also a P-towner. We've got Truro, Wellfleet, another Wellfleet, down the road in Wellfleet, Brooklyn, New York, Craftsbury, Vermont, Brookline, Mass, Missoula, Montana, coastal Eastern Connecticut, Colorado, Nashville, Tennessee. Oh my gosh, wonderful. Well, we are almost at our expected number. Forestville, California, saying the fires are finally easing. Gulfport, Florida. If any more come in, I'll read them. And so another technical tip, if we lose connection, please don't worry. Take a moment, have patience, and return back to your inbox as soon as internet restores, and click the link, the unique link that was emailed to you, and you'll jump right back into the meeting. It is being recorded, so if you have complete technical disconnect, we can send an exclusive recording to you. And I think all of our attendees are here. Let's see, we have Bend, Oregon, Marietta, Pennsylvania. Excellent. So again, you can use the chat to share your comments and feedback throughout the event, and you can use the Q&A tool for any questions at the end of the evening. Both are located around the edge of your Zoom screen. They're at the bottom if you're on a computer, they're at the top if you're on a phone. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my colleague, Kelly Groom, our Director of Education Programs.
Thank you, Naya. Tonight, we are thrilled to present our summer season finale, Poems That Will Help Us Through, featuring poets featured in the new 2020 Provincetown Arts Magazine. Jill Bialosky, Peter Filkins, Garrett Hongo, Maria Hummel, David Lehman, Sandra Lim, Sebastian Matthews, Alison Prine, Prageeta Sharma, and Joshua Weiner. We are also very lucky to have with us the editor of the poetry feature and the host for tonight's event, Major Jackson. Tonight's event honors Christopher Busa, founder, publisher, and editor of Provincetown Arts Magazine, and a longtime devoted friend of the Work Center. Provincetown Arts Press publishes an annual magazine and books by and about contemporary artists and writers. Chris founded Provincetown Arts in 1985 and dedicated the rest of his life to the magazine and to the press. The organization has remained true to its original mission, which is to support and chronicle the Provincetown arts community for 35 years. We are honored to have Margaret Murphy with us to begin the evening with a remembrance of Christopher Busa. Margaret Murphy was a beloved executive director of the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown from 2007 through 2012. Before that, she was an environmental and public interest lawyer in New York City. She lives in New York and Provincetown and devotes her time to nonprofit leadership in urban forestry and street trees. Margaret, thank you so much for joining us to honor and remember Chris.
Thank you, Kelly, and hello, everyone. I'm honored to be here this evening to say a few words in remembrance of Chris Busa. founder and editorial director of Provincetown Arts Magazine. Provincetown Arts was Chris's life's work, and the 2020 edition, the 35th annual, came out just after his passing in June from heart failure. As Kelly told us, our host tonight, Major Jackson, was the magazine's 2020 poetry editor, and I treasure this opportunity to once again be in Major's presence and yours. Chris and I became friends in the mid-1970s when we were both in our 20s. A few years after we met, Chris founded Provincetown Arts, and he devoted the rest of his life to it. Many years later, I became director of the Fine Arts Work Center, and our friendship grew to become both a personal and a professional collaboration in nurturing the arts in Provincetown. I can't say enough about the importance of Provincetown Arts to the vitality of creative writing, the visual and performing arts, and creative culture in Provincetown and the Outer Cape. For the last 35 years, no one has done more than Chris through Provincetown Arts to foster and preserve the town's contemporary cultural community. I'd actually like the magazine to speak for itself. This is its mission statement, written by Chris with the passion for Provincetown that his life stood for, and included in the front of every issue for the last 35 years. Published annually in midsummer since 1985, Provincetown Arts focuses broadly on artists, performers, and writers who inhabit or visit the tip of Cape Cod, and seeks to stimulate creative activity and enhance public awareness of the cultural life of the nation's oldest continuous artist colony. Drawing upon a century-long tradition rich in art, theater, and writing, Provincetown Arts publishes essays, fiction, interviews, journals, performance pieces, poetry, profiles, reporting, reviews, and visual features, with a view toward demonstrating that a community of artists functioning outside the urban centers is a utopian dream with an ongoing vitality. That's pure Chris at his most eloquent. From the start, Chris was a fervent friend of the Fine Arts Work Center. He featured stories about the fellows, including profiles, book reviews, and visual art critiques, and he published the fellows' poetry. It worked both ways in a truly symbiotic relationship. From the start, the fellows gave a big boost to the magazine's content, interviewing artists, poets, and writers, writing book reviews, selecting poems, contributing poems. Major is part of this long, fertile history, a former Fine Arts Work Center fellow who selected for this year's magazine the poets who will read tonight. Finally, let me say that Chris was a steadfast, active member of the Work Center's Board of Advisors and was generous in celebrating the Work Center in the magazine at important milestones, most recently the 50th anniversary of Fox founding. Elizabeth Winston, a writer, editor, and former staff member of the Fine Arts Work Center, has become the new editor-in-chief of Provincetown Arts, so the symbiosis continues. It will be different without Chris. We mourn his loss, but all of us will do our best to sustain his vision, his spirit, and his legacy. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you so much, Margaret. Beautiful. Thank you. Next, we have Major Jackson here to introduce the poets he selected. Major Jackson is a Work Center Fellow and Summer Program faculty. He's also served on the Board of Trustees He's the author of 5 volumes of poetry, most recently, The Absurd Man. His edited volumes include Ranga for Obama and Best American Poetry 2019. He teaches at the University of Vermont and is the recipient of honors from the Guggenheim Foundation, National Endowment for the Arts, and the Whiting Foundation. He serves as poetry editor of the Harvard Review. Thank you, Major. Over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Margaret, for that moving tribute to Chris Busa. I also want to extend gratitude to Naya and Dawn Zemelies for working behind the scenes to continue the magic of the Fine Arts Work Center in this virtual space. The center was built out of the loving spirit of artists to aid in the growth and development of fellow artists. Those early visionaries, Stanley Kunitz, Phil Malakote, Robert Motherwell, Myron Stout, Jack Twergoff, Hudson D. Walker, among others, were building on a long tradition of artists working on the outer tip of Cape Cod. Chris Busa gave a glossy face to that work and heritage. His contributions, like that of the Work Center, brought light to the unique place of artists within the fabric of our society. In speaking with Chris, one felt a genuine curiosity about what was happening in the now. Chris's father, the abstract expressionist painter, Peter Busa, was among those working artists in Provincetown. And he always spoke as if he were sponsored by the spirit and magic of that age. I was deeply honored by Chris's invitation to guest edit the poetry section of the Provincetown Arts 2020, which many had done before. That this is his last issue makes the assignment even more poignant and special for me. I want to extend gratitude to the folks at Provincetown Arts Press, particularly Elizabeth Winston. We extend condolences to the Busa family and all the staff at Provincetown Arts, and celebrate tonight the legacy of Chris Busa, who served the community of artists here and abroad. The 10 poets we gather here honor his legacy, as well as that of the Fine Arts Work Center. Like many, I have gained resilience from poetry during this period of global pandemic and social unrest. I am an admirer of the poets in this issue, and am excited for you to hear them tonight in our program poems that will help us through. I'm going to quickly interview them. We will proceed alphabetically, except for our friend Sebastian Matthews, whose birthday it is. Happy birthday, Sebastian. And he's also celebrating his book tonight on another Zoom channel. The book is titled Beyond Repair. But I'm going to read the introductions really quick and we'll begin our reading in earnest. Jill Bialosky's most recent memoir, Poetry Will Save Your Life, was published in 2017. She is the author of 5 collections of poetry: The Player's Intruder, Subterranean, The End of Desire, and most recently, her collection is Asylum, a personal historical natural inquiry, in 103 lyric sections that was published this month. Peter Filkins is the author of 5 collections of poetry, including The View We're Granted, Water and Music, forthcoming from Johns Hopkins University Press in April 2021. He has also translated the collected poems of Ingeborg Bachmann and 3 novels by H.G. Adler. He teaches writing, literature, and translation at Bard College. Garrett Hongo was born in Volcano, Hawaii. His collections of poetry include Coral Road, The River of Heaven, which was the Lamont Poetry Selection of the Academy of American Poets and finalist for the Pulitzer Prize, and Yellow Light. He is also the author of The Mirror Diary, Selected Poems, and Volcano, a Memoir, winner of the Oregon Book Award for Nonfiction. His honors include Guggenheim and fellowship from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Rockefeller Foundation. He currently is professor of creative writing at the University of Oregon in Eugene. Sebastian Matthews, the author of poetry collections Miracle Day, Midlife Songs, and the memoir In My Father's Footsteps. He co-edited Search Party, Collected Poems of William Matthews, and New Hope from the Dead, Uncollected Matthews. He teaches for Warren Wilson College, the Great Smokies Writing Program, and the Queen's University Low-Res MFA in Creative Writing. He celebrates tonight his newest collection of memoir and essays, Beyond Repair. Maria Hummel is a novelist and poet. Her most recent novel, Still Lives, was a Reese Witherspoon Hello Sunshine Book Club pick, Book of the Month Club pick, and the BBC Culture Best Book of 2018. She is also the author of Motherland, a novel, a San Francisco Chronicle Book of the Year, House and Fire, winner of APR Honeman Poetry Prize, and Lesson in Red, forthcoming in 2021. David Lehman's books include 100 autobiographies, a memoir, and playlist, a poem. He is the editor of the Oxford Book of American Poetry and series editor of the Best American Poetry. He has written nonfiction books about the New York School of Poets, classic American popular songs, Frank Sinatra, mystery novels, among other subjects. Sandra Lim is the author of Loveliest Grotesque and the Wilderness. She is the recipient of a 2020 Literature Award from the American Academy of the Arts and Letters, the Levis Reading Prize, and a Getty Foundation grant. She was born in Seoul, Korea, grew up in California, and now lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She is an associate professor at the University of Massachusetts. Alison Prine's debut collection of poems, Steel, was named a finalist for the 2017 Vermont Book Award. Her poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Plowshares, Virginia Quarterly, 5 Points, Harvard Review, Prairie Schooner, among others. She lives and works in Burlington, Vermont. Prageeta Sharma is the author of the poetry collection Grief Sequence, Under Gloom, Infamous Landscapes, The Opening Question, which won the 2004 Fence Modern Poets Prize, and Bliss to Fill. She's the founder of the conference Thinking Its Presence, Race, Creative Writing, Literary Studies, and Art, a recipient of the 2010 Howard Foundation Award and a finalist for the 2024 Quartet Prize. She has taught at the University of Montana and currently teaches at, I know this, Pomona College as the Henry G. Lee 1937 Professor of English. And finally, Joshua Weiner is the author of 3 books of poetry and the editor at The Barriers on the Poetry of Tom Gunn, Berlin Notebook reporting about the refugee crisis in Germany, which was published by Los Angeles Review of Books. The chapbook, Trump Poems, is a free digital edition from Dispatches from the Poetry Wars. His translation of Nellie Sachs' Flight and Metamorphosis will be published by Bear Strauss and Giroux in 2021. We begin our reading in earnest with Sebastian Matthews, and that will be followed up by Jill Bialosky. Enjoy the evening.
Major, thank you very much, man. It's an honor to be among these poets and included in tonight's reading. Thank you, Naya, and thank you, Kelly. I'm going to read the 2 pieces. The first piece will be a poem from the collection in this issue of the magazine, in the journal, and it's called At the Kamasi Washington Concert, Orange Peel, Asheville, North Carolina. First, the band warms up, thumbing through the first few numbers as rehearsed, like a runner letting the body find its groove on the path. Then the audience needs to warm to the band, letting their bodies take in the slowly evolving sound as it dresses itself up for the evening. And then, if both the band and the crowd make an extra effort to extend out inwardly into the place where the music fits itself, and the band members locate one another on the stage and retreat from their own roles, so to hear all the other melodies potentialize inside the larger sound. and the audience put down their needs long enough to find the back entrance to the song, the bar within a bar we always look for, and really tries to hear what it is the band is working out there, in here. Then there's a chance for the whole giant gizmo to spiral into its nub and gyrate into the rhythm and fly off into one long cry of song. And together, all these disparate bodies might resonate. Live music's great big funkadelic spacecraft rising up or beaming down or imploding in our chests and take us. This last piece is from the new book, Beyond Repair, and it's a memoir and essays, but I slipped in a few prose poems, poorly disguised. This is called Blue Nude. There's a jazz to moving through a day in Manhattan, an openness to improvisation required, stepping into the street, finger raised for the next top-lit taxi, descending into subway tunnels, rushing up to the next car, slipping in before the doors jerk close, sidestepping a crowd of bundled up workadays, or passing into an impromptu circus scene at the mouth of Union Square, or lending an arm to the old woman stuck at the curb, made immobile by the ice. Deep into the last weekend of Matisse's cutouts at MoMA, the crowd converges into a room and circles the walls filled with playful collage, taking in all the bright color and whimsical shape, the flowing lines, moving in and out of each other's sight lines, mumbling sorries and no problems. I position myself to get some face time with the blue nudes, my eye moving back and forth along the figures, taking a clandestine snap with my phone, bending down to read about their genesis. Matisse's assistant, Lydia, says, a small thing, blue on white. That was the start. In the last room, everyone seems high on joy, laughing and nearly dancing with one another. We've been showered with such grace and play, are reminded what hard work and perseverance in the face of death can accomplish. Walking out into the winter gray, finding a bar to rest in, choosing a drink and a few appetizers, letting our little table get lost in the group babble, going back through the show together. One of us, an artist himself, shakes his head and says, he was just an old man in bed with a pair of scissors. I fucking hate the guy. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jill Bialosky. I wanted to thank Major for including my work in the Provincetown Arts Magazine. Thank you to Kelly, thank you to Naya, and how wonderful to read with such a terrific group of poets. I'm going to read from my sequence. It's called Breathe, a Natural Sequence, and I'll read a few sections. The sequence also appears in Asylum, my new book that's just out. And so we looked for patterns, for order to ward off chaos, for aberrations that might offer a hint, because we were seekers, because grief had transformed us. Trees breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, releasing energy and water into the air. Some birth flowers of only one sex, and others both male and female flowers. The same way we bear fruit to those we bear and those who bear us. Even trees are in the presence of the divine, we were told. In some cultures, they are thought to have a consciousness, to feel happiness and pain. Some are twisted, some antithetical to the profane. In tree pose, otherwise known as Virashanasana, our yoga teacher says to stand on one leg for balance. Move the sole of the other foot into the inner thigh of the standing leg. Once you've found your balance, put your hands in prayer in front of your chest and then raise them over your head, arms to ears. Stand tall, steady, Grow, she says, root yourself to the ground, breathe. After the wind tore up our backyard, and in the morning pollen soaked the grass, forsythia burst forth, loose twigs hurled into the gutters, arthritic branches in the drive. Is it the chaos of God's will, we wondered? One had no faith, another fickle, one a believer, another dreamy and skittish. Miners, we collected stones, fished for worms in the ground, picked leaves, traced the veins as we tracked them in our palms, plucked poison berries, buried dead birds. We did not know of war or murder or the difference of skin. We knew only that from which we were. What are words when they meet the action of what they attempt to modify? What is snow but series on series of crystals of ice? What is pollen but a golden granular element of microscopic grains released from the male part of a flower? What are weeds but the aftermath of seeds the wind blows into a yard and threaten to overtake? What is grass but a blade of energy and a single instance of a mass? What is breath but air taken into the lungs and expelled? Once, due to disease, we had to cut down a tree to its stump, hoping the roots might sprout again around the edges and regenerate. To determine her age, still a baby in terms of the life of trees, we counted the number of circles inside the bark's circumference. 21 rings circled her breath. 21 years bequeathed to the warmth of the sun, pull from the moon, water from the earth. 7,665 days, 183,960 hours, 11,037,600 minutes in which her long arms locked in the roots and branches of sister trees, shared their sugars, were awash in daylight, and if a storm, suffered shaking in brutal darkness. And here's the last little piece. We kept our heads down. We were entranced, focused. Sometimes we could not see anything before us. That's what it required. One year I had forgotten the first leaves of spring. I had forgotten all the years of toil. I looked up and trees had flowered. All it took was waiting out the bleak winter, the hemisphere of darkness. The color was lime green. I wanted to tell her, this is what it's like. Thank you.
Hello. I want to thank Major Jackson, and what a delight it is to be among all of these wonderful poets, and to thank Major for including me, and of course selecting the poem, and to thank Nea and Kelly as well for all of their organization of this event. The first poem I'll read is a rather short poem, which is the one printed in the Provincetown Arts Magazine, which again is beautifully designed and looks wonderful. It's called Cockles. Sweet as abandon, an inlet's palate, muscled plankton, amorphous gullet, swallowing eons in a grain of beach, ribbed origin, wound reach, cribbed by sand, nursed on brine, heart clam, a bay's hard coin, splayed on a plate, bibbed with lettuce, mouths agape, the glut of status, washing them down with vintage swill, fat, meaty mounds, mute mandibles. The second poem I'll read is actually began on Cape Cod. I and my family have had the pleasure of going to Cape Cod for every summer for probably over 25 years. And I love the Cape. I live in Western Massachusetts. It's not that far away, but yet it's a different world altogether. And it's always a joy to be there. And this started in 2015, specifically September 27th and September 28th of 2015, which is when we had a blood moon rise. And my wife and I were on the Cape for it and watched it rise over Marconi Beach in Wellfleet. A blood moon has a very specific definition. It is one of the four full eclipses of the moon in a row. And they happen rarely. The last one to occur was 1967, 1968. And before that, I believe it was something like the 15th century. The next one to come is 2032 and 2033. And so the poem began there, and I think as you will see in some of its references has evolved since then, and just the very idea of a blood moon and its portents, particularly in 2015, when things were beginning to heat up, shall we say, intrigued me, and it's stayed with me since. Blood Moon Blues. Protesters marched, shutting down cities. Senators sponsored their own annuities. Car bombs were back, hemlines higher. Forecasters tracked low fronts and fires. Children were told their parents were thugs. Governments banned playgrounds and hugs. Analysts mourned stagnating markets. Terrorists surveyed expanded new targets. Refugees crossed invisible borders, arriving malnourished, colder and poorer. High up above, a blood moon rose. The seas churned on, the shore decomposed. Venus and Mars ascended in unison. Glaciers kept forming palatial ruins. While higher yet, at the back of space, a star imploded, leaving no trace, but hydrogen and helium, the seeds of our genus, potent as love or a neutral virus. Thank you all.
Hi, I'm Garrett Hongo. I'm going to read two as well. The first is, again, about a moon, or a moon time. And then I'll close with a poem that's in the journal. Watching the full moon in a time of pandemic. I watch the full moon's light slide like a silver water through the silhouettes of trees that cast long shadows over mounds and rocks, a hidden stream, and the expanse of lawn. I think back to when I played hide-and-seek games with cousins at the shoreline, Pupukeaj near Shark's Cove on Oahu, dodging in and out of the shadows of ironwood trees. We hid amidst the vapors of murk mixed with sea spray and wild laughter, sought one another in sands under the glassy moonlight that splashed our bodies like surf. We stood as though rooted, silent, while sighs from the sea carried through the cool night air. I was 4, or I was 5, and I was not Leanne or Neil or Carrie, but myself, counting my own breath, one with the dark, gazing at the silver gleam of heaven's road, making its path from below the moon, across heaving purple waters, to where I stood as I do tonight, 60 years from that first shining. I told it to my daughter, who hid in the moonshade, isolate and lonely, missing the welter of what life had been. Her father, 5 as a child, unfathomable, her slim form disappearing, while I stood seeking. This is the poem. It's in the journal. Just my imagination. In the college dorm room, I sit cross-legged on the floor, scripting ideograms on notebook pages, practicing kanji, sipping Mateus from a teacup, blazed with coppery red dragons with good eyes. Barefoot, I wear jeans and a plain white tee and bend from the waist to do this steady work. Motown plays from the stereo, the temps crooning a cool tune, and a rhythm slowly builds, a pulse of wordless feeling, a guide for phrasing, and images rise, recollections from childhood, the scents of the past, the chant of tides from the sea, a garland of cigarette smoke curling through household air, my grandfather dealing flower cards before him on the floor, the first plum blossoms bursting from a black bough, then yellow butterflies ringed around peonies, a white heron poised between twin pines before a pink cascade of sakura. Legacy is like this, insinuations, stray images collecting in the mind stilled from passion, fundaments persisting in our waking dreams. I move the cup aside, shimmering with wine. Left to right, I gather strophes with a pen from a swirl of flowers, trail of ideograms, tell you, running away from me, once again.
Hi, I'm Maria Hummel. This poem was inspired by the awful habit of deciding that your friends find you unlovable and uninteresting, and so you imagine your own funeral where they each miss you terribly. It's a bunch of narcissistic nonsense to write a poem about, but I did. And it's gonna sound a little illogical because I let the dead me and the living me in these couplets interfere with each other's parts throughout. So the syntax is conventional, but the word choices are coming from the wrong parts of the sentence. Thank you, everyone who's been involved tonight, from the organizers to the other poets to the all the audience here. Passing strange. Sometimes I envy her, the dead me, who expires too soon, like a fairy tale fledgling or fallen midnight, the suede teens I loved in my late jacket. Everyone misses the dead me. She always says the quietest things to her right friends and touches them so lightly, they think the kiss has leaned in to sun them. The dead me will never be lost as I am. She sews herself open, she smiles herself shut, flowing in a fit dress and throne. I only hold how to know. It is country in the part of autumn where I come from. The leaves are wrestling themselves winged from the south. Tree loose are flying creatures, and my mother writes to me of the daily pond from her departures, the last gray goose chased off by a frosty car, and a night driving too fast down their lane. Here in California, it is still birds, and the warm and leaves cling as if there is no business in this world but living on. It's been so seen since I've longed the snow, desolation, yearly and migration. I don't believe it. Can't there be an emptiness with no winter inside? Can't fall be a there without that red-stained wind? The dead me couldn't bear her own funeral, but I would, which is why I am still gone, and she is here. And then the second poem I brought is by Kay Ryan, who I think is wonderful for dark times, really all times. But this poem, Why We Must Struggle, spoke to me about poems that help us through. Why we must struggle. If we have not struggled as hard as we can at our strongest, how will we sense the shape of our losses, or know what sustains us longest, or name what change costs us, saying how strange it is that one sector of the self can step in for another in trouble, how loss activates a latent double, how can we feed as upon nectar, upon need? Thanks.
Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank Kelly and all the organizers and participants and Major for choosing my poem. My name is David Lehman, and I will read first the poem that Major chose that's in the Provincetown Arts Magazine. It's called Lunching with Elaine Equi. Sometimes when lunching alone, I bring Elaine Equi along for company. Rereading Ripple Effect, sipping a cup of strong black coffee and slipping into the room where Fairfield Porter paints the light and solitude rhymes with altitude, attitude, multitude, lassitude, and beatitude. That's how I see and hear things too. And the music is John Coltrane's Central Park West, where Elaine names the tenor saxophonist playing If She Were Having an Affair with Myself as a Married Man. Now, if we're talking shop, I'd have to pause here to talk about the line breaks, because her rhythms, her timing depend on them, and the rhythm and wit of her poems is their greatness, often achieved in short lines, bite-sized bits, though her prose poems are pretty amazing too, such as Ultra Confessional. The shoplifting stage follows the age of living in which Victorian novels are on the verge of swooning, and Found in Translation, which praises not only whatever cannot be killed by the translator, but all translations, even bad ones, because reading itself is a version of translation, a chain of logic leading to the epiphany that it would be great to learn French in order to read William Carlos Williams. The perversely patriotic narrator of one of Elaine's poems liked S&M before terrorism killed it on the evening news. I know what she means, but share her confidence that new sources of inspiration will continue to show up as two beautiful hookers, helping her decide what to wear. That was the poem that appears in the current issue of Provincetown Poets. And I have a very, very short poem that I wrote, just 3 words per line. It's in my new and selected poems. It's called Radio. I left it on when I left the house for the pleasure of coming back 10 hours later to the greatness of Teddy Wilson after you've gone, on the piano in the corner of the bedroom as I enter in the dark. Those are my 2 poems. Thank you all very much.
Hi, everyone. I'm Sandra Lim. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Major, and to the organizers. It's really wonderful. I sort of got lost listening to everyone's poem, but I'm ready. I'm going to read 2 poems tonight. The first one is called Portrait in Summer, and it's the one in the journal, and it wasn't written during COVID summer, but I think it could be. Portrait in Summer. This floral swimsuit is snarling. I am regularly spoiling for a fight. Within me, fat is always curing, like a ham in a shed. I go inside and read another psychosexual story set in a dreary seaside town. There are water crossings, one too many 4-poster beds. summertime, parole for academics, long days, low yields. The flies stream into the kitchen, bringing friends, spouting aphorisms. The only major mystery left to life is death. I prop an ashtray on my bared stomach. I should grow thinner, more of less of me, as I grow more solitary. But I haven't yet found a manner in which to get over my inconsistencies. On my way to fulfill some banal commission, I'm conscious of waiting for the season to run its course, and of accumulating an anger around a simple truth. All perfect friendships eventually come to an end. Is it a story that must at all costs be dragged from the darkness? It starts to rain and the streets smell like hot dogs, old pennies. The coffee shop owner barely lifts his head from the register as I approach the counter that's crowded with menorahs, crosses, and Buddhas. I meant to bring him a statue of Venus de Milo for good measure. It would all have the mixed effect of a moral dullness and deep fear. I notice this is the only place in town without a television. I like the angry pinch of an insight, the rough grasp of hard news. Yet in these very dog days, what might have been ennobling has often left me dull and vicious, a surprise I just wasn't on to. And the second poem I'm going to read is called San Francisco. My older neighbor on Rose Street once showed me the contents of his rent-controlled apartment, just up the stairs from mine. He was a hoarder, living in a state of tragic grandeur that his circumstances did not entirely support. Recurringly, his latest boyfriend would flee from him. When we met later in the alley to take out the trash, we would reliably turn into two lumps of fear. What was more terrifying than being abandoned? Downstairs, I was a collector too, with my need to interpret and sort everything. But we didn't tire of the spectacle of our private lives, though many initiatives went badly wrong. I was altogether more anxious about being light-minded. My railroad apartment was a small cloth diary with a lock and key. It was my real life, or what so often passes among us for real life. And for all his possessions, my neighbor dreamed of having a petite Trianon with a vast garden to walk in and dog roses lavishing a limitless dining room table. Of course, there was no table because there was no dining room. Obviously, there was never a garden to walk in. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for these poems. I'm loving hearing them so much. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in to hear us tonight. And thank you, Major, for choosing my poem for this beautiful collection. Thank you, Kelly and Naya. And I want to express my deep appreciation for the Fine Arts Work Center and for Provincetown Arts. I'll read two poems. The first from this beautiful collection in Provincetown Arts, Close. Oh, I'm Alison, Prine. Close. When people say, like a sister, they mean something unlike a sister, I think, because there is nothing like a sister, not even a brother, not even a lightning storm after drought, not a stone wall, crowded in Queen Anne's lace. Look for the small purple fleck in the center. It isn't always there, but when it is, it focuses the grace. So much of what we lost was held in the same hands. So much of what we haven't said we don't need to, though sometimes our emissions fall through the strata like acid rain. I don't know what happened in your family. But in my family, it felt like the world was split over and over, and all that was left were sisters. Far north. Spring rolls in hard, swift, brash, heedless, box elder saplings, blackberry and burdock, break ground any place we leave alone. A dozen dark purple tulips sprang up by the front steps. Did we plant them? Another gesture I can't remember. What I conceived, things I once said with such conviction, how I got from there to here. I am not the person who moved here from Pittsburgh decades ago, but I feel her inside me, earnest, righteous, drowning in want. I find a broken blue egg in front of our house, and I want to ask my wife if she believes it is an omen of loss or a beginning. Sometimes I find her crying in the shower. I'm struck by all I can't take from her hands, like the water running between them.
Hello. It's really wonderful to be here. And I want to thank Major and Kelly and Naya and the Provincetown Arts Magazine and the Fine Arts Work Center. And I'm just also just moved by all these poems and the wonderful company. So many friends here. And also I have to give a shout out to Peter Filkins, who was my first poetry mentor. And I just am so grateful to be able to read with him. I'll start with my poem from the magazine. Metaphorically charged. I meant well and resisted comparisons for a while because those who might cajole me into finding their inaccuracy accurate need likenesses. I was meant to find myself inside a metaphor, but I wasn't there and I felt disillusioned. Instead, I built the word with the bricks of what comparison might mean with another suffix. What I meant was, I was keen to add nouns. I wanted to add wound to comparison and build its condition to be matter of fact. I found the condition of the wound to be built into its state of cruelty. She said they have wounds too, and that's why they feel this way. I said I'm not trying to wound them, but they like thinking of their wounds, my wounds in a certain way. I find their wounds to affect cruelty, and mine did not attend the same effect. I'm angry at those who have been economical about what I might have meant. I'm despairing because I created meaning from a grievance nobody dared to own. They wanted the grievance to be possessed after it was vetted, and I didn't want to give it to them. And then they lied about what they thought of comparisons, which are metaphors lying about what they said they mean. Then I'll just read one more poem from my book, Grief Sequence, which this poem is about what happens when I lost my husband to esophageal cancer in 2015, and I also fell in love with a widower after that. And I also like thinking about the process of sequences and thinking about them. I look at your handwriting. Oh, I realize I'm not looking at you at all. Sorry. I look at your handwriting. I look at your handwriting and it pushes space into its narrow field. His were big atmospheric box crosses with architecture. Your speech and talk are the opposite. You have soft catalectic vowels. His were hard chains of dream speak. How is this possible? What is richly characterized by handwriting? What is its dictionary of attributes? Where is there an airy space between the way he and I loved? Because then and suddenly I loved again, and it arose against sequential time. This makes loving two persons its own counsel. One followed the other, but there is still yet simultaneity. The other loved me, but had trouble loving, and I had to absorb this after death. There is loving without knowing, and loving with some knowing, two bodies separate in the night after the coupling of evening time. One goes up and slowly dies, cigarette after cigarette. After his feeding tube and bile duct were inserted, he wouldn't sleep in our bed. The two broad categories of sequence learning exist, explicit and implicit, with subcategories, which also become dreaming and reading the handwriting. You were the first person, and now you are one person, and there is a second person. Explicit sequence learning has been known and studied since the discovery of sequence learning. However, recently, implicit sequence learning has gained more attention and research. A form of implicit learning may be implicit dreaming. Maybe a contrary dreaming occurs. Maybe dying is more implicit in its sequence. Maybe learning refers to the underlying methods of dreaming, of airy spaces, or writing words to both beloveds. That contrary people are unaware of what's explicit and what's implicit. In other words, learning without knowing is dreaming. Thank you.
Good evening, and thanks to all of you for being here. Also thanks to Naya and to Roger, and thanks to Alison, and also to Chris Busa. What Margaret Murphy said about the Fine Arts Work Center and about Chris, that symbiotic relationship, that was really true. I met Chris in October of 1993 at the start of a fellowship at the Fine Arts Work Center. And over the 25 years that I knew him, he never failed to convey at every chance meeting genuine curiosity about anything and everything going on in the world of dedicated artists and writers. And he channeled that curiosity into his own serious dedications and devotions. And he made the world a lot richer and a lot more interesting by adding his energy to it. He was really a phenom. I'm going to just read the poem that's in the Provincetown Arts Journal. The first stanza of the poem opens and closes with phrases that are taken from a famous late 19th century Scottish ballad about Bonnie Prince Charlie's escape to the island of Skye after the Battle of Culloden in 1746. This was a favorite song in the childhood of my brother-in-law, Whitney Blake, who died in 2017. But tonight the poem is for Chris. It's called When the Night Came. When the night came. Speed, bonny boat, like a bird on the wing, like a tear that exits an eye. Carry the boy like a runaway king over the sea to sky. Over the bridge, and eggs over easy, asleep on a bed of hash. He was dreaming of floating the winding Zambezi with pelicans scanning for fish. Now he's downtown, starring in a film. Now he's shelving books with a laugh. Now in Atlanta, he finds a forum, taking Hawkeye photographs. Now he's married. Now, with a kid, the waters run too fast. He says goodbye to what he did, refuses to live in the past. Over and out, the stars are winking. They're speaking. What do they say? The margins were jagged. The phrases faded and strung as he drifted away. Speed, bonny boat, like a bird on the wing that goes from low to high, and through a crown that's lost its king, and through a king, its boy. who hides in the halls of Hawthornden, threading every deadeye, tossing the tuners of his mandolin over the sea to sky. Like a bird on the wing, like spokes in a wheel, we speed, hold tight, and keep true. We say, keep it real, working by feel, and now there's nothing to do. Nothing to feel as a bird on the wing, nowhere is where he's gone. Never is when, and no one is king under the unmarked stone. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks to all the poets. I, like you, I hope, well, like all of us, I'm moved by these poems, but I think once again, we notice how poems pull us closer to ourselves, and the indomitable human imagination is once again at the core of our survival. Chris Busa knew that, and he gave us this fine magazine that I'm happy will live on after him. I want to thank all the poets and also suggest that you buy a copy and support the magazine as well as the Fine Arts Work Center, and say that there are other poets in this issue who could not join us, Joshua Bennett and Maggie Smith and Evie Shockley, all fine poems. What a wealth we have with these poets and with art that's still being made today. So thank you for joining us, and I believe we're going to have Q&A, but I'm going to turn it over to Kelly and Naya.
Thank you so much to all of our poets for such a beautiful night. So we do have a few questions that have come in. Major, did you want me to take a look at those?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the first one is not a question. Prageeta, I just finished Grief Sequence for the Seeley Challenge this year. It's a magnificent piece of work. Hearing you read it is even better. The second question, I write centos and often draw lines unaltered from collections and anthologies, including Best American Poetry. How do you receive seeing your lines in a new work fully acknowledged as homage or plagiarism?
Interesting question. Who does anyone have a take? Well, personally, I take it more as a homage. Part of the conversations that happen between artists depends upon occasionally high-fiving in some form or fashion. And there's many poets who have high-fived each other. But maybe others feel differently. That's a very interesting question tonight.
I agree with Major. I don't know if I can be heard because I'm a rookie at this.
I can hear you.
I think poetry is a conversation. And it's a conversation across time, and I think it just expands the conversation when that happens. Not only is it homage, it grows the conversation.
I just found a letter that I received. I'm pulling together a bunch of papers, but I found a letter from 2001 before the great poet Philip Levine had passed away, and I wrote to him asking permission to use a line from one of his poems, of which he wrote back and said, I didn't need to ask, that it was there for the taking. But nonetheless, he granted permission if I needed it for my publisher or anyone. But I thought it was pretty instructive to say that you don't need permission, have fun. That's what it's there for. It's when you take more than 2 lines that I have a problem.
You probably haven't heard this story, but his students often told me, his former students, that Phil stole from them all the time.
Oh, frozen.
Garrett, you're frozen. Oh, there you are. I just saw you.
I just said that you probably hadn't heard this, but Phil's former students at Fresno used to tell me all the time that he stole lines from their poems.
He lived what he preached.
Yeah.
I think you get in trouble when you write a letter asking someone for approval to use a line or two, because then you're implicating someone else and making more of it than it needs to be. Particularly if you're borrowing a line from John Donne or William Butler Yeats, because if you write to them, they get an answer, but it may not be what you want to hear.
Hey, here's a question for you, David. You can quote poetry all you like, but if you quote a song lyric, there are real issues.
Sure, it costs a lot more money to print 5 lines of Ira Gershwin than the 4 quartets of T.S. Eliot.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that's true. 10 lines of Ira Gershwin.
Here's a question for Prageeta. Ms. Sharma, how did you come to the structure of grief sequence?
Oh, I was thinking about sequences. As lots of us have dealt with grief, sometimes you lose time and you lose some memories. And so after Dale died, I couldn't remember our marriage. I could only remember those last months of the hospital. And so I really wanted to think about the poem as a place to document time and to build back a sequence that I could rely on and I could trust.
Thank you, Prageeta. Kevin Gallagher asks, what a wonderful evening. While the first poems that were read were the selected poems, I'm curious from a few of the tellers, what inspired their second choice?
I'll just jump in. I already explained it. Mine was inspired by Cape Cod, being on Cape Cod, so it seemed appropriate for the reading. I'm curious for other choices.
I chose my poem because I heard you read the poem about the blood moon. I just ransacked mine finding one about the moon.
Great.
Alison, San Francisco.
I don't remember what inspired me. I didn't read the San Francisco poem. I think that was someone, was that Sandra who read the San Francisco poem?
Oh,
yes.
Oh, sorry.
Whoops.
It happens.
Oh, sorry. I realized I was muted. Partly I chose the San Francisco poem because like many of us, I've been stuck in my tiny little apartment. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts right now, but I'm on the top floor and I don't do very well in humidity. So I think I was just imagining myself away to a colder climate and just thinking about the past a lot, sort of unrolling memories for myself during this pandemic.
Thank you, Sandra.
I chose my second poem because it consists of only 42 words. And so it was very succinct. And I thought that would be a friendly gesture. And I wonder why Joshua did not read a second poem.
I'm waiting to be invited back.
question. This is a popular question for poets during this time. Are many of you writing now while you are dealing with the pandemic, or how has the pandemic affected your writing?
I'll speak. I'm sorry. I find myself writing a lot of memory poems because there's not a lot of immediate experience. And I don't write a lot of memory poems, but I find myself writing poems about my youth or people I've known. And I was writing a lot of these, and I began to ask myself, why was that the case? And I think that's why.
I feel like my own poems are getting shorter and stranger, like I'm starting to speak to myself in my own feral language. I don't know if that's, if there's something about quarantine that and isolation that I think, forces you deeper into yourself. And so the poems are coming out from a much, maybe similar to writing about memory. They're coming out of trying to verbalize experience in a different way.
I've been writing more sort of hybrid poems right now. I think, sadly, I lost my mom at the end of March, and I wasn't able to go to her burial, and I've been spending some time just taking long walks up these trails, and there was this amazing lighthouse that we found one day on these trails, and it was sort of felt like this kind of beam of light calling that felt like my mother in some ways. So I've been working on something, prose and poetry, and we'll see where it goes.
I've been working on translations during this period, trying to finish this translation of Nelly Zach's that Major mentioned. Translation has actually been a great thing to have in front of me every morning when I woke up to work on. The poems are there. They just need to be rediscovered in a way. And there's a kind of, there's just an enormous kind of effort that one needs to make every day to keep up with the language. There's just industry and work involved, and you have piles of dictionaries and reference books and all that stuff is very helpful, kind of concrete, tactile stuff to work with during this time.
In the spirit of this event, what poems by anyone have our reading poets found helpful, creatively, intellectually, or simply emotionally to read and reread over the last few months?
I'd like to give a shout out to a book that I think Jill edited. Did you edit Headwaters by Ellen Bryant Boyd?
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like that one is really good for now, because the way she works syntax and unwinds syntax, I feel like we're in kind of a syntaxless moment where, our sense of the rules and order of things are lost. And she creates order out of syntax, but it's also, the poems feel very free and associative, and they're just wonderful. And some of them I think are about isolation too, in ways that are very moving to me. So Headwaters, Ellen Bryant Boyd's collection, I think is great.
That's great. Any other shout outs?
I actually picked up the 4 quartets. Somebody mentioned that someplace around the way, and I found it very resonant to the times. And again, about memory and time and stasis and circularity and sort of being caught in a sort of trapped in time, I guess. It was wonderful, as it was before the pandemic too. guess so.
I'm joking. I'm a big fan of Eliot's four quartets.
Oh, I'm very fond of them.
I've been reading, oh, is this?
Yeah. No, you're good, Jill.
Hey.
Now you're on mute.
Back on mute.
There.
There you go.
I've been reading and listening to Moby Dick on audio and then reading some passages, and I'm finding that it really is like a hybrid poem. It's just so incredible. I mean, of course I read it, you know, many years ago, but somehow being contained on the ship sort of feels a little bit like COVID, like, you know, we're all contained in our little pods. So it's really interesting to think about it as a hybrid poem. Maybe I'll write something about that one day, but I've been enjoying it.
This is independent of, well, related. Do we feel like these moments, these acute historical moments, put a test on the classics in ways that we maybe previously took for granted their import and their valence? We all know, for example, 2001, how Auden's poems came back to us. What's the relationship between what seems like these oversized moments and literature and poetry?
Well, you know, I was quite depressed when the pandemic first broke and the lockdown started happening, but more than that, the deaths. And I was revived by reading with a group of Italian scholars and poets, reading pieces of the Decameron, but we quickly went to Dante's Purgatorio. And the Purgatorio has been very, very sustaining and hopeful because rather than just mocking the distance of the illnesses as what's going on in the Decameron, Dante is going through illness, vanity, sin in Purgatorio, but he's always moving towards the light, you know, because heaven is up ahead and the meeting with Beatrice. And so it puts a kind of that Dantean, you have to say, Christian cosmology in play as part of the narration, but it's also the great painting that goes on in terms of the scenes of Purgatorio. So dramatic, but also the contrast between the different shades of darkness in Purgatorio and then when the light does shine through, whether it's a visitation of the angel or a glint of light from a different position higher on the mountain. And you never forget, his own moods are either guileless or in some ways distracted. And he feels like the pilgrim who is as bewildered as any of us might be in a dark time. Whereas Virgil, his guide, and also some of the penitents have stronger knowledge, firmer beliefs and convictions. So it's interesting. It's been very interesting to sort of be carried along by that narration, but also to be inspired by that cosmology. And have the benefit of Fiorentino speaking Italian. That is just the greatest. You know, not being able to go to Italy, it's second best thing is to hear native speakers.
Wow, that was a free lesson on the Decameron in about a minute and a half. I'll send you send me an invoice, Garrett. I owe you for that. I'm going back to the Decameron.
I just want to say that I found myself rereading all of Audre Lorde's poetry and essays in these last months, which although I've held them inside me for decades, I haven't read them, and rereading them, I feel like they've helped me make sense of my current experience in a new way that, you know, that I've grown into over the decades. And I feel grateful for those pieces.
Thank you, Alison.
I just wanted to say, this isn't poetry, but it grew into poetry. It's a now classic, but it's a new classic. Is thinking about Octavia Butler's Parable of the Sower. We just read that as our orientation book, and the students made poems, they made verses, and made their own book of the living from that. And it was just really helpful.
Was the book chosen before the pandemic?
Yes, it was chosen in February. It was.
Yeah. Well, thank you, each one of you. Someone's asking me to read one of my poems. I'm sorry. I'm just in editor mode right now, and host mode, and just really grateful for these poets. And I'm coming back to that phrase, the indomitable human imagination and the import of these kinds of gatherings, which turns us into a community which is at the core of the mission of the Fine Arts Work Center. And Chris Busa amplified this community and extended it. So in that spirit, I want to thank Kelly and Naya and Dawn Zimiles, and happy Margaret Murphy was able to come back and join us for this event. And I hope you'll continue to support. I think if there's any moment to support the arts and the humanities, this is it. A lot of institutions are struggling right now. I will say this is not what drives us, the financial end of it all, but it's of great benefit to our lives. So thank you all. Thank you, Jill and Alison and Prageeta and Josh and Garrett and David and Maria and Peter and Sandra. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And Sebastian in absence. Okay.
And thank you, Major, for bringing together this stunning group of poets and poems and generously hosting this event for us. Thank you too to Margaret Murphy for helping us to honor and remember Chris Busa, who created such a magnificent space for writers and artists. You can order copies of Provincetown Arts Magazine online by visiting the press website, which Naya has shared in the chat. We also invite you to order copies of new books by our presenters through East End Books here in Provincetown. You can order online. The address is also in the chat. And East End Books will mail nationally. If you live on the Outer Cape, they'll hand deliver to you. And thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We've been very grateful to receive all your emails and comments in support of the virtual series. It's truly been a wonderful space for all of us, for presenters and attendees and for staff. We've been asked to continue the series into the fall, so look on our website for a new slate of events beginning in late September, early October. And also in early September, we're making the entire series, summer series, available on our website, free and available to the public. So please visit that as well. And thank you again. Good night.